Psalm 3, verse number 1 through 4. It reads like this: Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory, and the lifter up of mine head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. I want to talk to you this weekend from the simple subject, what to say when you don't know what to say. Take your seats in the presence of the Most High God. Thank you, ushers. What to say when you don't know what to say. Brothers and sisters, I don't think I will find one person to argue with me this morning if I was to say that there are times in all of our lives that things happen and we simply don't know what to say. Life has a way of creeping up on you when you least expect it. The unexpected will ambush you, and you will find yourself without adequate response for what to say in a situation. David this morning offers us 3 lessons as to how to handle life and what to say to life when we don't know how to react and to respond. When we look at this psalm, Psalm number 3, it is important to understand that Psalm 3 is the first prayer in the Psalms. But Psalm 3 is not a fiery, soul-stirring prayer that you would have heard back in the day by an old Baptist deacon on the first Sunday after he shook hands with all of the other brothers and some of the sisters, as if to say, you prayed last week, you prayed the Sunday before, it's my turn now. It's not one of those prayers that are impressive. It's not one of those prayers that uses holy soliloquy in order to be impressive to those who are listening. But Psalm 3 discloses David's deep drama, his deep despair, his deep defeat, his deep discouragement, and ultimately his great discovery. For in Psalm 3, David discovers that he had been disrespected, discredited, and dogged by his own son, Absalom. Absalom had a problem with David, and you can read the backdrop of that in 2 Samuel chapter 13. For David's daughter Tamar was sexually violated by his half-son Amnon. And Absalom was angry with his father because he did not like how he dealt with the situation. Let me stop here long enough to insert parenthetically that we as a family have got to learn how to deal with things, how to talk through things and work through things, or else we too will continue to pass down generational animosity. Absalom was angry with David, bitter with David. He hated David for not dealing with this violation to Tamar. And so what Absalom did is what many people do in this world. Out of a sense of anger, out of a sense of hatred, he began to attack his father's reputation. He began to do all he could to dethrone David. In fact, according to 2 Samuel chapter 15 through 18, Absalom actually sought to take the throne from David. And so he launched a dirty political campaign of verbal attacks against David that began to progress with the same people that once loved David. Never put too much stock and energy into people, because people can change like the wind. As David began to lose favor with the people, Absalom put a hit out on his own father's life. Out of fear, David fled from Jerusalem in order to get away from Absalom. And in David's absence, Absalom Absalom took over the throne of his father. Now, it's hard to imagine where David must be emotionally right now. I mean, his daughter has been violated by his half-son. His older boy has put a hit out on his life and is doing everything he can to tear his father down. What do you say in a situation like this? When you're the king, but you're on the run from your own son? How do you respond when life gives you lemons? How do you deal with it when the very one that you gave birth to threatens your very existence? How do you handle it when your dreams go up in smoke? How do you cope with it when people that you love hate you to death? How do you deal with it? What do you say when you don't know what to say? May I suggest to you from this third psalm the words of David that is that we have to face some facts sometime. And we have to recognize sometime that what we need to say is this: I will always have critics in my life. Now, I'm trying to help somebody to get free in this house today, to help you to understand that no matter how good you are, how much you go to church, no matter how much you do for people, there will always be somebody who volunteers to be the critic of your life. Look at verse number 1. That's what David seems to suggest, that we ought to go and admit it. I will always have some critics in my life. Look at verse 1. He says, Lord, are they increased that trouble me? Have you ever had that thought in your life? Have you ever been going along in life doing the best you could, doing as much as you could for people, and yet it seems as if those who you tried to help did all they could to try and hurt you, and you wound up saying, Lord, why is it and how is it that these in my life have increased who are trying to trouble me? It seems like there's been a decrease in those who are trying to help me triumph. David said, how are they increased that trouble me? Look at what he says in the B section. Many are they that rise up against me. Now listen, you need to go ahead and admit it and face the fact and make the statement that I will always have critics in my life. You see, opposition and criticism go along with the territory. Let me make it live for you in bad grammar but good gospel. If you ain't doing nothing worthwhile, you ain't gonna have nobody to say anything negative about you. But as long as you are doing what's right, as long as you are trying and striving to please God, there will always be somebody who positions themselves as the Siskel and Ebert of your life, whose job they create for themselves to be your number one critic. If you're not doing anything worthwhile, then you're not doing anything worth talking about. There will always be critics in your life. And the thing about a lie that I have discovered is that a lie can make it to the other side of town before the truth has time to wake up and put his sneakers on. You're going to always have somebody that can find something wrong with you. There's always somebody who can identify your flaw. There's always somebody that if they don't see it, they can fabricate it. There will always be critics in your life. Secondly, David teaches us what to say when you don't know what to say. Number 2, he teaches us to say there will always be commentators in my life. Look at verse number 2, and I'm headed to the crib. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. Now here's where they messed up at. They were doing fine as long as they were just talking about David. But when you start talking about spiritual things, be very careful what you say. Because when you start talking against spiritual things that you don't understand, you start talking against God and don't even understand it. Look what they say. They said of him, the king is beyond the help of God. He says, many there be that say there is no help for him in God. You see, when they began to make this statement in verse number 2, really, they were unaware that they stopped talking about David and started talking about the ability of David's God. Because what they were saying was that even God can't help David. That's where they messed up. And I want to just urge somebody in here to be very careful what you say about spiritual things and spiritual people. Before you invest time talking, you need to investigate with time learning. So that in your ignorance, you don't end up being a fool and discounting God. Because a lot of times we'll talk about stuff and don't know what we're talking about. We just like to hear ourselves talk. So they messed up here because they began to talk against God's ability to work with David. So he says, they said here in verse number 2, listen, I'm going to always have critics, I'm going to always have commentators. Many there will be. Which, that's why I encourage folks, stop talking negative about your own self. You got plenty of volunteers doing that for you. Oh, Lord, you ought to wake up and say amen. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. Now, there's a little word there that I did not read when I read this text in your hearing, and that word is Selah. I did not read it because it is a musical term. It was used in musical terms. In our English or Latin derivative, we have the word formata. And what a formata is a symbol printed on the music, on the sheet of music, and it means play until you get to that point. But when you get to that point, pause and look up for directions from your conductor. All right, here it is. God is saying to somebody in this house, you got your eyes on the wrong thing. You got your eyes on your critics. You got your eyes on your commentators. But God is saying, after you get through with all that, pause and look up. Because the conductor has a tempo. He's getting ready to take you in. He's getting ready to drop the downbeat to let you know the song is not over yet. He's getting ready to take you to a new place so you'll have a new song to sing. Anybody know that if you trust God and get your eyes off your critics and off your commentators and keep your eyes on your conductor, he'll change the tempo. How do you know he'll change the tempo? It's right here in the beginning of verse number 3. The word but is a conjunction. I'm about to wrap it up here and let you go home and watch the game and eat that chicken, but watch this. Verse number 3, but is a conjunction. It joins what was with what's about to be. I said it joins what was with what's about to be. That's why you ought to thank God for every but in your life. Because the buts come in your life to remind you of where God will bring you from and where God is about to take you to. I'm going to buy me some amens in this Presbyterian church. I said you ought to thank God for the conjunctions in your life because it takes you from where you were to where God is getting ready to let you be. Watch what he says, but thou. Now, it's important whenever you read the Bible to know that there is no waste of words. Every word has value. Every punctuation mark, every comma, every colon, every semicolon, every period has value. I want you to pay attention now to the pronouns. Look back at verse 1 and 2, and we'll wrap it up like that. We'll just do it like that. We're going to do the doggone thing. Let's do it and get through with it. Here it is. Watch the pronouns. Lord, how are they? Let church say they. Increase that trouble me. Let church say me. Watch this. Many are they. Let the church say they. That rise against me. Say me. Many there be which say of my soul. Let church say mine. There is no help for him. Say him. In God. All right. Now I want you to notice that all the pronouns in verse 1 and 2 are talking about me and they. Look at it again. How are they increased against me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which say of my soul there is no help for him in God. But pause and look up and you'll have a different perspective. Because the pronouns change in verse number 3. Look at it. But thou. Now in King James Old English, T-H-O-U is Y-O-U. The only time you use the word you is when you're talking directly to the person that you're calling you. Okay, in verse number 1 and 2, he's talking about they're over there. He's talking about me, I'm right here. But in verse number 3, he's talking about thou to God, meaning that God is closer to you when folk are giving you trouble than he is at any other time. Y'all ain't gonna get that. I see that now. I see that now. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna give you the Methodist version today. Here it is. He says, thou, oh Lord, watch the pronouns, are a shield for me. My glory, the lifter up of mine head. He says, I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. All of the pronouns in verse 3 and 4 are talking about me and God. And I come to tell somebody up in this house this morning, you got your eyes on the wrong pronoun. You got your eyes on what they saying and what he's saying and what she think and what they said and what they want you to do. Take your eyes off of the wrong pronouns. Keep your eyes on the God who is close to you. In verse number 3, the God who is working it out for you. In verse number 4, God gets my glory. God gets my attention. You don't have time to be concentrated on your commentators and your critics, because the third thing that David says you ought to say when you don't know what to say is concentrate on his commitment. Here it is. I'm done. He says, thou, oh Lord, watch this now. You promised me some things. You promised me that you would be a shield for me. Lord have mercy. You can concentrate on your critics. You can concentrate on your commentators, or you can concentrate on your commitment. I don't know about y'all, but I'm concentrating on what he promised me. How about you? Do I have two folk gonna ride with me? I'm concentrating on what he promised me. Let's break it down. He says, thou, O Lord, art a shield for me. Let church say shield. Now, what is this shield thing? The shield is my protection. God promised me, he committed to me that he would be my protection. In Ephesians chapter number 6, the Bible tells us to put on the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And with the sword on the soldier's arm, his face would be covered. His body would be covered right down to his feet. And the Bible says that with this shield of faith, you can quench the fiery darts that the enemy throws your way. Don't miss the picture here, because David says, thou, O Lord, are a shield for me. And behind this shield, my mind is covered. My eyes are covered. My heart is covered. My emotions are covered. My legs are covered. In other words, the enemy can't do me no harm. He can huff and he can puff, but he can't blow my house down. What? I got a shield in front of me. Is there anybody in here know that God is a shield for you? Is there anybody in here not too mean, not too cute, not too sophisticated, not too fine today because your hair's all curled up, to admit the fact that if God had not shielded you from some things, you would have been out of your mind by now. If God hadn't kept you, you wouldn't know your name. But thank God he's a keeper. If you want to be kept, he's a shield. That's my protection. Thou, O Lord, art a shield for me. But let me show you the other promise that God promised. He promised not only will I be protection, I'll be your presence. Look what David says. David says, not only are you a shield for me, but you are my glory. Now, anytime you read about glory in the Old Testament, it's always talking about the pillar of fire by night and the pillar of cloud by day. It represented the presence of God. Or it is talking about the tabernacle, where the outer court and the inner court and the Holy of Holies dwelt. Israel, anytime they moved, they always took a replica of God's presence with them. And whenever the presence of God was present, there was not a demon, not an Ammonite, an Amalekite, or folk that won't do you right that could defeat them. Whenever the presence of God was with them. Now, that's why David said in Psalm 23, he says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Before I got there, you were already with me. So there's nothing that I can go into, and he allows me to go by myself. When I go to the doctor, his presence is there with me. When I'm applying for a job, his presence is with me. When I'm going to a business deal, his presence is with me. When I go through trouble, his presence is with me. And he promised I would never leave you nor forsake you. I'll be there with you until the end of the world. Show me what demon can defeat you when God's presence is with you. If God be for us, who can be? He promised me his protection. I hear you. He promised me his protection. He promised me his presence. David says, thou art a shield for me. He says, you are my glory. That's your presence. But then watch this power he promised in the end of verse number 3. He said, you are the lifter up of my head. Lord have mercy. Here's what I want you to understand, that not only does he promise us his protection and his presence, but he also promises us his power. Now where do you get power from, Pastor? Because the text says that he is the one who lifts my head. Let me see if I can make this live for you. Go back to verse number 1. Absalom's trying to kill his father David. Tamar has been raped by her half-brother Amnon. Absalom has turned the whole kingdom against David. The people that once loved David now hate David. They've got an all-points bulletin out with posters with David's face all over the place. The place God gave him, he has had to run from it because his son is trying to kill him and kill his good name. How in the world can you say that God can lift your head after all of that? Here it is. Don't touch that dime. You see, everything that happened up to verse number 3 was designed to make David look down and feel down. And the enemy has a way of reminding you of everything you've done wrong in your past. I mean, that rascal can pull up stuff in 1956 and you weren't even born yet. The enemy and people have a way of making you feel down, and the reason why the devil wants you to look down is because he wants you to have an earthly perspective about your situation. He wants you to feel like you need people that are made of dirt to validate your steps. He wants you to look down so that people who are made of dirt can control your destiny. But I hear David saying, I can't look down no more. David said, I'm the one that wrote Psalm 121 verse 1. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My heavens and earth, lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. He is the King of glory. Just look at somebody and tell them, look up, look up, look up. So David says, you lift my head, you gave me something to smile about. And I want to prophesy to about 12 folk in here to let you know that in the midst of all you're going through right now, God is getting ready to make you smile again. He's getting ready to lift up your head again. I know it hurts where you are. I know it's difficult. I know it's a tight spot. But get ready. He's getting ready to lift up your head. Look at somebody and tell him, he's going to lift my head. I should have quit, but verse 4 is saying, please say something about me, preacher. So I want to respect the call of the verse to my theological presentation this morning, lest I hold you too long and leave you without what you really need. Because verse 1, 2, and 3 is the test. Yes, Lord. But verse 4 is the testimony. said verse 1, 2, and 3 is the test, but verse 4 is the testimony. You can't get to the testimony in verse 4 unless you go through the test in verse 1, 2, and 3. Here's the test. God tests you to see, will you pay attention to your critics in verse 1? Will you pay attention to your commentators in verse 2? Or will you pay attention to my commitment to you in verse 3? If you pass the test in verse 3, you can have the testimony of verse 4. Well, what does verse 4 say, preacher? It says, I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. Come here, old Baptist deacon. I heard the voice of Jesus say, come unto me and rest. Lay down thy weary one, lay down thy head upon my breast. I came to Jesus as I forgot y'all new school, y'all brand new school, as I was weary, wounded, and sad, but I found in him a sweet old resting place, and he has made me glad. I cried unto the Lord, and I wouldn't stop calling him until they answered me. Is there a witness in this house this morning that can testify? If you call on Jesus, he will answer prayer. Have I got a witness? As I leave you here, let me leave you like this. I told you earlier that right after verse number 2, there's this little musical term called Selah, which means to pause and to look up. But I noticed something interesting. At the end of verse number 4, I hear David saying, when I think about all the times I've called on the Lord, I have to stop one more time and look up again. Everybody here been going through something and you don't know what to say. Sometimes you don't have to say a word. Sometimes all you have to do is pause and look up. And notice, yes, the tense of verse number 4, verse 1 through 3, yes, is in the present tense. How are they increased? They're troubling. That's present tense. Many there be. They say there's no help for me. That's present tense. But when you get to verse number 4, he changes from present tense to past tense. He said, I already cried. Yes, Lord. I already prayed. Yes, Lord. I already hollered. Yes, Lord. And he's already heard me. I came to preach to somebody in here this morning that's already been crying. You can stop crying now. You've already been suffering. Don't suffer no more. You've already been worrying. Stop worrying. Lay down and go to sleep at night, because when you cried, he already heard you. When you wailed, he already made a way. And I came to tell you, it's already done. Shake your neighbor's hand. I feel a Baptist If he spoke it, he's going to bring it to pass.